Good evening. Can everyone hear me at the back?
Yes.
Great. Good evening. Welcome to the National Museum of Wales. I expect to see so many of you here for our event, Come Dine with the Future. I'm John Cudlick. I'm Director of Membership Marketing and Communications at the Royal Society of Biology. And if you're not aware of us, we are the unified voice of biology in the UK. And we are a professional body for over 17,000 individual members. And they range from all the areas of biosciences and from students all the way up to Nobel Prize winners. So if you're not already a member, do come speak to me afterwards. As a society, we do a lot of work in science policy, and that's reactive and proactive. So we respond to government consultations, for example, the recent Teaching Excellence Framework. And on the proactive side, for example, we are leading on the UK Plant Sciences Roadmap. In terms of our education work, we advise on school curriculum, and we run competitions for school children. And thanks to generous support from the Welsh Government's National Science Academy, we're developing an online training module for primary school teachers, particularly in Wales, to support them with teaching science. Next year is a special year for us. We're hosting the International Biology Olympiad for the first time in the UK. So we'll be bringing together the top biology students, school students from over 70 countries for a whole week of competition and celebration. Another big area of our work is public engagement. So we're always keen to share our enthusiasm for the biosciences, and we do this in a number of ways. We coordinate hands-on activities at science festivals, but also other events. So for example, we've taken activities to music festivals and country fairs, and we're always keen to reach a diverse audience. For a number of years, we've also been running a number of citizen science projects. So you may have heard of our Flying Ant Survey, and we also have a house spider ID app called Spider in the House, which has had over 70,000 downloads to date. And our latest citizen science project is called Britain Breathing, and that's all about linking people's allergy symptoms with local air pollution or pollen data, so do look out for that one for next year. We coordinate Biology Week every October, which is an annual opportunity to celebrate bioscientists through activities and press activity, and we had over 100 events take place this year under the Biology Week banner. And we also put on events like this one tonight. So tonight, we are asking you to imagine that you're hosting a dinner party in 50 years' time. Imagine that you're still alive. What do you think you'll be serving your guests? And we put this question to experts from food-related industry and research to present a menu that they think that we will be eating. So the panellists will each put forward a menu which they think is representative of the future availability and sustainability of our food, and they'll highlight how current research in their sector will shape our future choices. So our panellists tonight are systems biologist Professor Katherine Denby, geneticist Professor Helen, agroecologist Professor Firbank, marine biologist Dr. Stentiford, and urban farmer and entrepreneur Tom Webster. And you can read their biographies in the program that we've given you in the backs. Professor Achim Doberman is also with us tonight, and he's Director of Rothamsted Research, and he will review each menu as we go along. And our chair, Diane Fresquez, will invite questions and discussions from you, the audience. So we are recording tonight's event, but when it comes to the questions from yourselves, we're going to turn off the recording so you don't feel that you need to hold back on your questions. And also joining us this evening, just up there, is graphic artist Laura Savannah from Aura Lab, and she is capturing the menus and discussion in a graphic format live, and you'll have a chance to see her work at the drinks reception after the main event. And we'll also be encouraging you to vote for your favourite menu at the reception. So before we start, I just want to thank David and Surinder at the Circular National Research Network for Low Carbon Energy and Environment for partnering with us at tonight's event, and to all our speakers. And you'll see that we've come up with some very delicious dishes, and I'm hoping that you'll leave tonight kind of ready to try eating stuff that you've never considered eating before. So I just want to now pass over to our chair for this evening. Diane Fresquez is an American food science journalist living in Brussels, and she's the author of the book, A Taste of Molecules in Search of the Secrets of Flavour. So in search of the menu of the future, please welcome Diane and enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Good evening, and Welcome to the Restaurant of the Future. Before we take a look at the menus, pass the menus out as it were, we're going to set the scene a little bit and rather sort of set the table with a short Q&A. And that I'm going to ask some questions of Professor Achim Doberman. Achim is the Director and Chief Executive of Rothamsted Research, the longest running agricultural research station in the world. He is also a member of the Leadership Council and co-chair of the thematic group on sustainable agriculture and food systems of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDSN. So welcome, Achim. It's a bit of an alphabet soup, all the things I just said. So come up here and we'll have a short Q&A. So you're going to be reviewing the menus for us tonight, but as I said, I wanted to set the stage with a few questions. And just, first of all, how did we get here? If you could define the term food security for us and very briefly touch on some of the major factors that affect it. Now, I've got climate change, the growing global population, rising food prices, and those twin evils of obesity and hunger.
Yeah, I actually looked up a definition which I like, so I'll read you this because it's actually one that I find quite understandable. It's 20 years old, it's from the World Food Summit that was held in Rome in 1996, and it said, food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for a healthy and active life. So I think that's quite a mouthful, but it expresses it. And nowadays we define this further in terms of availability, access, utilization, and stability of food. But I think we all realize that the situation that we're in at the moment is largely because we have grown as a world population, still at a pretty high rate, even though this is slowing down. We are facing increasing threats from climate change that require us to adapt also the way we produce food. It does pose new risks. And as you've pointed out, we have at this point in time still about 800 million people suffering chronic hunger, but we also have 2 billion people with micronutrient deficiencies and 2 billion people who are overweight or obese. So altogether, 1 in 3 people, one way or another, have multiple forms of malnutrition in the world. And that's obviously quite an alarming situation.
Right. So it's a big theme, and there are a lot of things that affect it, but and some of them are extremely depressing. But how about some good news? Could you list some of the key areas of research and development that are contributing to more sustainable food systems?
Yeah, I think it would take a lot of time to go through many, but let me just cite maybe 2 examples. I'm coming from a farming background, so that's where I've spent all my life working on in terms of agricultural research. And I think even though agriculture often has a negative image nowadays, I think we need to be also saying that we've made a huge amount of progress in how we do agriculture and how we think about it. So I think we've seen in the last 2 decades a huge change in terms of moving towards better practices. We're not yet there. We still not, I think, need to do a lot in terms of really having more holistic approaches, how we manage crops and animals and whole agricultural systems. But I think in general terms, we have been able to grow agricultural productivity and the efficiency of many inputs and lower the footprint per unit of food in terms of carbon, water and other things. The only problem has been that our total output has grown hugely because of the demand side of things. The second more concrete example that I've been involved with for quite some time before coming to the UK is the development of a new generation of stress-tolerant rice varieties for poor farmers in Asia, which is essentially a free insurance policy against climate change, so drought and flooding or salinity or combinations of those that affect you. That has been solved, or not solved completely, but at least attacked through new ways of crop breeding that essentially have taken advantage of the huge knowledge that we nowadays have about diversity of plants and genes, and using that in conventional breeding programs, and essentially accelerating the development of new varieties that are much better suited to the new environments. And there are lots of these kind of examples, and I think we'll probably also hear a few later on from our speakers.
Yes, we will. So there is a lot of good news. Now, as we go into the future, I'd like to talk a little bit about politics, if I may. So I'm going to read you a tweet, which many of you may be familiar with. A little man named Donald tweeted this. Global warming is a total and very expensive hoax. He also tweeted, it's Donald Trump in case you haven't guessed already. I just want to make sure you know. Another tweet he made was, the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make US manufacturing non-competitive. Now, you do know that they took his Twitter account away from him during the election near the end, so I think they still should. But my question to you is, what do you predict will be the effect of a Trump presidency on global food security?
Based on what we've heard so far from him, I don't think there is a huge cause for optimism in terms of really strategic leadership in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And that follows a period in which the US government actually was fairly active, also through the Feed the Future initiative that they put up in the two previous administrations. So I think we are concerned about this. I still maintain a minimum level of hope that pragmatism will prevail, and that hopefully he, like any other leader, starts listening a little bit more to the evidence at hand and also to the experts in the field. But unfortunately, that's not often the case in politics. So.
No. Well, I'm still hoping that the recount turns out well for all of us, for all of our sakes. So, and now we're going to get to the menus. It's that part in the restaurant when the waitress hands out your menus. And Achim, just briefly, how are you going to talk about these menus? What are the criteria you're going to use?
So it's difficult because they've all come up with really clever stuff,
yeah.
You know? And they've done a lot to essentially preempt any criticism, you know. So at first I thought I'm going to use a scientific approach, you know, I'm going to look up every item and do the food tables and the footprints and whatever else, the life cycle analysis, and that would have cost me a lot of time to spend. So I'm going to use a sort of a common sense approach, you know.
Good.
So
are you going to include taste as well? Because that's always.
Well, I was hoping that I could eat them, but I can't. So you have to imagine the taste, and so. But what I will be interested in is largely three things. So, would we consider that to be part of a healthy diet? You know, is it good from a nutritional point of view in broad senses? The second one that interests me always a lot is based on my background. Would that represent a good farming practice? You know, in a sense that is it good for the environment, for the soil, for the animal, for whatever? You know? And then the third one is the sort of the gut feeling factor, or the subjective factor. Is it doable? Is it actually doable, or would it actually be acceptable? Would it have the appropriate economic impact for rural development, for farmers, or whatever? You know, so I'll look at it from those few angles, but don't expect too much depth.
Okay, well, gut feeling is very good. That has many meanings. So we're going to start with our first menu. So would you all please welcome Professor Katherine Denby. Katherine is from the Biology Department at the University of York and Academic Director of the N8 Agri-Food Resilience Program.
Thank you there. Well, thank you for the invitation to speak to you tonight in such an unusual event. And I'm looking forward to telling you a bit about my research through the choice of menu. So I work mostly on disease resistance, improving disease resistance in crops to reduce waste. And it's becoming increasingly important as well with climate change as new diseases spread to different areas. variety is salad. So this is a salad with the lettuce and tomato, bred for enhanced disease resistance. Now, breeding has been going on a long time, as you no doubt know, but traditional breeding is very much based on how a plant looks. Breeders will plant out a lot of different plants and select the ones that have the characteristics that they're looking for. And then over the last few decades, that's swapped from just a looking perspective to actually being able to look at the genes in those plants and follow the genes in the breeding program. And this is particularly important because some characteristics actually require more than one gene, and we can be more efficient at breeding if we can actually look at the genes. But the challenge is, as you can see here, if we take lettuce, for example, lettuce has got about 40,000 genes. So the challenge is, how do we find the ones that are responsible for things like disease resistance and then enable us to track them through the breeding program? So my starter, built on the research that we're doing, is we start with lots of variety. So on the left here, we've got lots of different lettuce varieties. And these lettuce varieties have different versions of genes, and they have genes controlled in different ways. And so what we then do is we collect lots of data on all these genes. So this is our big data. And we use computation and computer algorithms and mathematical approaches to help us identify which genes we need to obtain and which genes we need to track in the breeding program to get disease resistance. So to turn our lettuce on the right here from being more prone to disease to less prone to disease. So it's using big data and the diversity of all the different lettuce types to actually speed up breeding. And my vision is that in 50 years, this type of breeding and using big data will be commonplace. And this approach really depends on that diversity. We need all that diversity in the different types of lettuce to be able to find the genes that we want, that can give us the good characteristics. And if we think over the last 120 years, there's been a huge reduction in the number of different varieties of vegetables in this picture that are commercially available. And it's important we maintain this variety so that we can combine it with new technologies to actually give us biodiversity to work on and to respond to the new challenges of agriculture. So in 50 years, I hope that we're mining diversity that's captured in seed banks and gene banks to actually breed improved crops. So my main course is based around one of the facets of global food security is that as populations become wealthier, consumers tend to demand more meat. And meat consumption is has a greater impact on the environment than plant consumption. And so what my main course is around eating an azolla burger. So azolla is an aquatic fern, which is very high, it grows fast, and it's very high in protein content. It's also got the very attractive characteristic of being able to pull nitrogen in, fix nitrogen from the air. So azolla has actually been used for centuries in rice paddies as a fertilizer. So it fixes nitrogen from the air and puts it into the rice paddy. It's also been used as weed control because it grows across the top of the water and prevents mosquitoes. In the last few years, this azolla has been sort of used as a livestock feed. So my vision for 50 years' time is actually azolla is going to be one of a food that we will be eating and plant-based, part of a plant-based protein diet. And grow with some really innovative agricultural practices. So for example, there's some quite exciting duck, fish, rice, azolla systems where each are sort of almost an entire ecosystem in itself. My dessert is peach and almond pavlova, and along with this I'll be drinking a South African dessert wine. So peach and almond pavlova, this brings me back to my interest and where I think there's a growing importance in agriculture of big data. So peach and almond orchards are some of the earliest examples of where we're using precision agriculture. So precision agriculture is managing agriculture so that the inputs are controlled to where and when they're needed, rather than a sort of wholesale fertilising or wholesale watering. So with this precision irrigation, this relies on aerial images of the peach and almond orchards, and these can come from drones or from satellite data. And the orchard owner, the farmer, will have an app or a computer program that will monitor these images, analyse the images, and then convey that information to the watering system such that the water is delivered in the amounts and where it's needed. So a very efficient way of using water in agriculture. So with my dessert wine, the same as it will be happening in these South African vineyards. And also I work on disease resistance, and Botrytis cinerea is a fungus that is usually a problem for crops. So in my early pictures on lettuce, that was Botrytis infecting lettuce. But it has one positive role in that we need it to make dessert wine and sweeten desserts. So my menu for the future is really based on the use of big data to enable us to breed crops more effectively and efficiently and to carry out precision agriculture.
Thank you.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? So a couple of comments. I think very interesting menu. I like the starter because that's absolutely doable. We're doing it already in modern crop breeding, and actually I think, if anything, that can be achieved much faster than 50 years. So we don't have to wait for that salad for 50 years. So
it can be routine in 50 years.
I think it can be routine, yeah. So and for those of you who are not into crop breeding, it's largely actually done in a conventional sense, so it's not necessarily GM technology. It's something that we call marker-assisted selection, other types of things. Yeah. So great stuff, can be done. Nice, nutritious salad. So I have a bit of an issue with the Azolla burger because I can't quite imagine how it would taste, for one thing. But also because I've lived for 15 years in Asia working on rice and then rice paddies, and what has happened there is that the Azolla has all disappeared, largely because it requires a lot of water to grow. You need standing water and labor, so manual labor, which has risen in cost many times in recent years. And the water is a particular issue because we would like to reduce the water footprint of rice paddies, to have actually less standing water, which makes the Azolla a bit more questionably accomplished and of course, if it would actually have that nutritional value, it would be good. But for the time being, I think I'd probably stick with a sustainably grown grass-fed beef or lamb burger from the Welsh uplands. And I'll leave my comments to that.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. So our next menu, it's kind of a set menu. It's nice choosing from set menus. So please welcome Professor Helen Sang. Helen is a research professor at the Roslin Institute, University of Edinburgh. She has been involved in developing technologies for genetic engineering of the chicken for use as a research tool and for applications in biotechnology.
Okay, very nice to see everybody here this evening. So my choices for my menu have been very much influenced by where I work, which is the Roslin Institute at the University of Edinburgh. Where much of the research there is involved in farm animal genetics, farm animal breeding, and also understanding diseases of farm animals. And for my first course, I'm going to have smoked salmon. So I live in Scotland, and salmon is a major part of the aquaculture industry in Scotland, which is a critical part of the Scottish economy. And the smoked salmon, I forgot to say that my meal will be cooked for me by my son because he's a very good cook, so it will be tasty. And we'll be having smoked salmon from Scottish salmon that's farmed in Scotland, and it will be very much, if you eat it, it'll seem very much like the salmon we have today, but it will have undergone very significant genetic improvement. And I have a colleague, Ross Houston, who is working with others, both in the UK and internationally, to use genetics to select salmon that is resistant to a lot of the major diseases that cause huge losses in the salmon production industries. For example, in pancreatic necrosis virus, which is a nasty virus that kills salmon, he's found that there's a genetic variant that gives resistance to that disease, and that is now being incorporated by Salmon Breeding Company into their breeding program. So all the fish they produce will be resistant to that disease. There's another disease, sea lice, which is revolting as it sounds, and I think there's a lot of effort going on to find genes that confer resistance to that disease. So these will be included in breeding programs of the salmon. And that's not only does it stop economic losses, but it also means you don't need to treat the salmon with treatments that pollute the waters, and it's also better for the animal welfare. So then another aspect of eating salmon is that we're encouraged to eat oily fish at least once a week, and that's because the oily fish contain omega-3 fatty acids, and those have been shown pretty convincingly to be good for our health. Salmon accumulate omega-3 fatty acids in their meat, but they don't make it themselves, they accumulate it from their feed. And I think you may have noticed quite recently there were articles saying that the level of omega-3 fatty acids in salmon has gone down a lot, and that's because that feed is expensive. And they get the omega-3 fatty acids from fish meal and algae that are collected from the sea. And that's competing with wild fish in the sea and wild seabirds. So actually colleagues of Achim's have come up with a solution that they're working on with people at the Institute for Aquaculture at Stirling University, and that is to adapt this plant here, camelina, which is an oil seed. So you collect the seeds for feed, and they're adding genes to this so that this crop will make omega-3 fatty acids as a component of the seed. And the idea is that this can be used to feed salmon, so you don't need to collect the fish meal and algae from the sea to feed the salmon. Jonathan Napier, who's leading this project, suggests that you could very easily grow in Scotland enough of this camelina to feed all the salmon that's produced in Scotland. So going on to the main course, it's roast chicken, which Marcel will be cooking for me with nice roast vegetables and garlic and herbs. My own research involves the chicken, and the chicken actually is an animal for which breeding has already been very successful. So in 1950, you got 330 kilograms of poultry meat per ton of feed. By 2014, it was 590 kilograms of meat per ton of feed. So that's an almost 80% increase in the efficiency with which these birds can convert the feed they're given into meat. And that's not only an efficiency in terms of the supply of feed, we feed them on wheat and maize, so expensive grains, but also in terms of the amount of land you need for raising the chickens. So it's gone down from about 80 million hectares to produce the amount of chicken that was needed in the 1950s down to about 45 million hectares worldwide. And that's very important because the demand for meat is going up by between 1% and 3% a year in the world at the moment. So we need to be more and more efficient in producing to meet that demand. But although the geneticists have been very successful in breeding these birds, which are not only selected for growth, but many other characteristics that are very important in their selection, one of their problems is control of disease. We have vaccines, we have some genetics of disease resistance, but for many diseases there are problems in controlling them. And one of the ones that you'll hear about a lot, of course, is bird flu. And bird flu is not going to go away because it's a disease that was present in wild water birds. And they're the main reason it's distributed around the world. Last year there was a huge outbreak in North America, and it was shown that the virus had been carried by wild birds up to the North Pole, right over the top and down into North America. And then those birds passed it on, migrated south and distributed bird flu in North America, which results in many, many millions of birds being slaughtered to try and control the disease. And there's no real genetic solution as yet to flu. and there's real problems in developing vaccines to flu. And so my research is involved in trying to use a genetic modification approach to make chickens resistant to bird flu. So we're trying to add new characteristics to the genetics of the chicken to make them resistant to flu. And this is one of our birds here from our program, which is ongoing to try and alter chickens to be resistant to bird flu infection. And I think it's a very powerful approach, because if the bird is genetically resistant, you don't have to introduce it like you have to introduce a vaccine. It's there in the birds that you rear. And for my last course, because I knew I would run out of time, I've chosen to have Scottish cheese and oatcakes, because I live in Scotland and I like the locally produced cheeses and I like oatcakes. And I think in 50 years' time, we'll like exactly the same things, and that hopefully there will still be production of local cheeses in Scotland that we'll finish up the meal with.
Thank you very much. Very
Yeah, I hope that too. And actually, from a durability point of view, what Helen has proposed, I think a lot of it, could probably be grown in Scotland, if not all of it. Yeah? So that's an interesting consideration. Yeah? I think starting on the back end with dessert, yeah, I can see that. It would be really nutritious and tasty. It adds a bit of the carbohydrates that were perhaps missing in the starter and the main. We need some energy, otherwise we can't function. Yeah. Be nice to add a bit of fresh fruit to it, probably, another piece of the balance. Yeah. We're coming to the starter and the main. So, in essence, what she's proposing is a somewhat more GM-based solution, let's say. So, for those of you who find that difficult to swallow, well, think about it. I think there's a lot of good science behind this, and I'm obviously totally biased because the camelina omega-3, or making fish oil in a plant instead of fishing it out of the oceans, is an interesting solution for that particular purpose. Yeah. So, but it requires modification of 6 different genes, and that can at present only be done through a GM approach. But it is based on 20 years of solid science. We believe it is done very transparently and scientifically sound. So, at this stage, I would say it would actually represent a very good farming practice in that sense, from a sustainability point of view, because we can continue growing the world aquaculture industry, which, for those of you who don't know, last year was the first year where fish grown in aquaculture was more than wild fishery. And aquaculture is growing at a rate of 7% a year. So we need to find sustainable feed sources for this sector and do it right. And it's the same for the chicken. It's very popular part of our nutrition in many countries. So if we can find better ways to raise the chicken as well as make them more productive, then I would say we should not from the beginning rule out also even GM solutions for this. But I'll leave it for you to judge that.
Thank you very much, Helen. Very tasty sounding. So, our next menu. Please welcome Dr. Grant Stentiford. Grant is a pathologist and director of the European Union Reference Laboratory for Crustacean Diseases and an honorary professor at the University of Exeter. He works on diseases which limit production of food from aquatic systems. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start with a Jacques Cousteau quote. I've not been called a marine biologist for a while, but I'll go with it. He said, we must start using the sea as farmers instead of hunters. That is what civilization is all about, farming replacing hunting. At the moment, as was mentioned just now, at the moment, if you look at the fishmonger's slab, if you go down there, about half of that fishmonger's slab is produced from fish and shellfish that are captured from the sea. And the other half, as was mentioned, is actually produced for farming. So Jacques Cousteau's sort of prediction, way before aquaculture really took off, was correct. And just in this year now, we're seeing within even countries like the UK, where aquaculture is really starting to take hold and become a major sort of source of our food. So this is a good news story because the food we're about to start eating, it'll probably be before 50 years, but actually aquaculture for my children's generation will be the way that they source their seafood and other products from the water. If you look at the production figures, these are them, you'll see the red part of the chart here started to go a bit flat in about the mid-1990s. That's wild capture fisheries. This is because two things. One is overfishing. Globally, it's a well-publicised story. But secondly, there's much better management of fisheries now as well. So that's really reflecting a likelihood that we're not going to be able to take much more from the sea by wild capture, that flat line red. The little yellow strip in the middle there is wild capture from fresh waters, same rules apply, not much more coming there. But the blue line going up, really expanding from sort of the mid-1990s up to present, has shown that real increase in the aquaculture sector. And as was mentioned, about 50% now coming from wild capture. Now what I'm going to try to showcase today is, from the UK perspective, is a menu that's built upon what we call an integrated multi-trophic aquaculture system. So you're farming animals together which need to be fed, like fish, with those which then extract some of those sort of impacts, like nutrients from the water to grow as well. So things like shellfish and seaweed. And my menu is based upon that. I've cheated slightly because the menu that I put together is actually using the ingredients which I asked to be used. But Matt Follis, who won MasterChef in 2009, put the menu together. So that's top trumpet, if you ever saw it. So here's my menu. The first thing we're going to be eating is Southwest grown mussels served in a nori butter, so seaweed butter, with some bladderwort, again a seaweed sourdough bread. Now, there are ways of growing these shellfish now out in our oceans. It's a very big facility now, coming into place within Lyme Bay, where I live, and the farmers in the audience. John Holm, you have offshore shellfish. This is going to be producing many, many tons of mussels, very beautiful mussels, very clean, very edible, very quick growing, naturally settled, naturally fed mussels from our own waters offshore. Moving offshore because there's a lot of impact of people living on a small island like the UK into coastal waters. So move offshore, reduce the risks. So that's our mussels. Similarly, I predict there will be these farms existing in close proximity to these seaweed farms that we can see here, where you can use that rapid, fast-growing and essentially free resource to potentially remove nutrients from the water and to grow essentially free once we've installed the facilities out there. So products which are based around seaweed will become very much more important in our diet, I predict, and it will make good use of these integrated multi-trophic sites offshore. That's a starter. The main course, we're also going to be looking at salmon. This is it's been mentioned some of the good facts and figures about the salmon industry already. There's a prediction from the Scottish Scottish government, that the industry of salmon in Scotland will be probably doubling in production in the next, up to 2030. That's the aim. So creating about a £3.5 billion industry for the UK. It's a great product, and there's been lots of moves in the last 20 years or so to really improve the environmental credentials of salmon. Most of the farms now are accredited under schemes like the Aquaculture Stewardship Council and GSI, the Global Salmon Initiative, to really try to improve those metrics and to make sure they're creating a good product without damaging the environment. So we will see salmon increasing, and I think the Scottish industry is probably leading the way in that respect. Another thing you might not know about is there is a programme at the moment within the UK, based in Cornwall, where we're going to be eating this salmon in this menu with lobsters, but not lobsters that are caught from the fishery, lobsters which are actually grown in container culture, which are floating on these ropes you can see on the right-hand side of Cornwall. And what we're producing here, after about a year or so, is a lobster that will sit on your hand, like in the picture there, and it might be a new industry whereby we're actually taking some of the pressure off the fishery and producing these small lobsters in cages, or containers, which are then, again, feeding naturally on the organisms which settle on and around those cages. So this sort of integrated system. The final course, if that wasn't enough, is again going back to this idea of seaweed, and for this time extracting product from seaweed, in this case agar, to make a very healthy jelly out of this, which is going to have embedded within it lots of fruits from the UK, which will also be grown under the systems that other colleagues here will be mentioning. And to go with that, we'll be drinking this Pinot Noir wine. Pinot Noir is now the main red grape that's grown within the UK. It likes to live in cold places which have warm pockets. That's where it prefers to live. Matt Follis, who runs a Brownie Cafe, was telling me that he's a New Zealander, by the way, that in New Zealand they didn't even really make Pinot Noir before 25 years ago. Now it's an amazing product, and predicts that the UK will be producing this amazing product as well within that next sort of 20 to 30 years, and we've got the right climate for it. So that's my menu. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds delicious. From where I look at it, I would say, well, it sounds like something that would really emphasize rural or regional economic development, which is great because we can't have all the people leaving the countryside and moving to London or wherever else. So we need to have economic opportunities, and if that means raising lobsters or mussels or whatever it is, or even growing Pinot Noir in pockets of warm climate in a cold country, well, that's a great idea. I think Grant is counting a little bit on the future climate change, which is probably still happening for a few more decades until it might hopefully stop. So we'll see. So, and I think the other thing that's interesting, I think, with his menu is that you can do a lot with marketing. If you've got the right person who comes up with the right description and words, it becomes quite attractive. And I think you can package a nutritious menu of this kind in that way too. So the ingredients that he has proposed there all make sense to me. So I would probably go ahead and try that if I could. So the only other question I had is that is it affordable? Because it could be quite expensive, this menu, and so it may be a thing that you could eat once in a while if you're quite affluent, but might not help us to solve major food security concerns. But that depends on your target market.
I know this is for the future, but has your master chef cooked any of this, or something near it, or?
I think so. Yeah. I guess most of these products are available pretty much already. But the key thing is the challenge for aquaculture is a bit like not quite as extreme as a GM issue, but it's the cultural change. We're a hunting nation, and to change then to a farming nation will take a lot of changes and to occur as well at the local rural community level. And that's happening, but it's a cultural change.
That's a good point. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. And for our next menu, I think we're going to be full by the end of this. We're really to eat all of it. So, please welcome Professor Les Firbank. Les is Professor in Sustainable Agriculture at the University of Leeds, addressing the sustainable intensification of agriculture in a time of climate change. Les also leads the sustainable food production theme of the Agri-Food Resilience Program of the N8 universities in the north of England. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you a lot for coming here. This is a great venue. I've not been here before. I'm an ecologist, and so I have a rather different perspective than the other people here, because I'm conscious of the changing environment and how do we fit inside that. And by changing environment, it's not just things like climate change, but it's also the political environment. So the shades of Brexit coming in here, and also the social environment, and how people can benefit from what we eat, and what we can do to help that. And no, I didn't get a master chef to help, and I'm hoping that won't be necessary. Just click on previous. Click on previous. I haven't got my glasses on. Right. First of all, a tribute to Wales. It says on the Carmarthen Ham website that, of course, the Italians got the idea from Parma ham from here. Well, I'm not going to argue with that, but that seems a really nice starter. But the twist here is that the protein source for livestock, we've already mentioned, is a key issue. And one of the potential protein sources that have already started to be trialled for pigs and other organisms are insects. So you get the pigs to eat the insects. So you don't have to eat them. You can get the pigs to do that. And also, there is a climate change thing going on here, because I do love cured ham with olives. And we already have the first olive groves planted in Devon and in Kent. And the idea is that by the time they get ready to produce, the climate will have moved far enough and fast enough for them to actually work. You've heard a lot about going from hunting to farming. Well, I want to go back. I want to do some hunting. I particularly want to hunt the American signal crayfish, which looks all right, but it's an invasive alien. It was actually introduced into the UK for recreational hunting, and unfortunately it's doing some hunting of its own. It's outcompeting the rather lovely English crayfish, and so one way of getting rid of it is to eat it. And there's a photo there of crayfish Bob, who is making a career out of catching these American crayfish, popping them in various bits and pieces and flogging them off at various festivals around the world. I think it's a great idea. We can have the herbs and vegetables grown under LEDs indoors. We'll be hearing a little bit about that later on. And for paella, well, where does the rice come from? And I'm not a rice expert, so I'm not sure if this will actually work, but I thought, why can't we grow it on a sewage farm so we're taking it to the nutrients? But I thought maybe your tractor might be a bit strong for that. Anyway. Now, I'm not into superfoods, but a lot of people are. But this one was prompted by a discussion I had recently about, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it, I think it's acai. And apparently this berry, which is supposed to be super, it ought to be super because you actually harvest it from the top of trees in the Amazon rainforest. And why would you do that is because the people in the Amazon rainforest need good, coherent sources of income. And this actually is worth quite a lot of money. And so if you have these berries, what do you have with them? Well, flicking through my expert good housekeeping cookbook, sorry, not Michelin star, but I was working on it, papaya. One of the issues with papaya is a lot of papaya production around the world has been hit by ring spot virus. And so that's been coped with by using GM. Yogurt. But you don't want high-fat yogurt, but you want yogurt that tastes good. And there's new food processing systems coming through that high dynamic pressure processing, which gives the impression of a high-fat creamy yogurt, but without the fat in there. Finally, Manuka honey. The thing I like about Manuka honey is that there's about 10 times as much sold as actually produced. So you want to know that this is properly quality assured, fully traceable, and if you're doing that, whether the Manuka itself is doing you any good or not, you are actually benefiting the pollinators and some of the insect biodiversity in New Zealand. And so what do you have to wash it down with? Yorkshire wine, of course, which is already there.
Thank you very much, Larry. I think you can join us at the table if you'd like, but I think the Manuka honey must be another Chinese hoax somehow.
So
I think as long as you have a tiny little bit in your pot, you're all right.
So I haven't had Yorkshire wine yet, but I'm sure it will get better within 50 years. So
Shame on you.
I'll wait a little bit for that. So yeah, interesting menu, and I think the only one who's brave enough to say that we should still be eating pigs. And I think there's nothing personally, I don't know, maybe that's because I'm a German, so eating pigs is something that I think is an important part of the food chain in many ways, because we also need animals who can convert things that otherwise would be wasted, maybe. Yeah. So I like that concept. And using insects as part of this pig diet is something that definitely has raised a lot of interest recently for various reasons. The question with insects is always, can you produce enough of them at a low enough cost? What's the energy needed and raising them in a cold climate? But there's quite a bit of work on the technology going on right now, so I would say, yeah, it seems possible to me and it could make a good product. Yeah. I thought a lot about the crayfish. my concept has always been, well, if you have an invasive species, you want to get rid of it, or you want to avoid that it comes. Now you're proposing getting rid of it as part of a menu. So, but wouldn't that create then a demand that then leads to others reintroducing it, restocking it into the market? There's a bit of a risk there, I would say. So I'm not quite sure how human behavior would react to that market all of a sudden. So that's a bit of a question mark I have on that one. And then the dessert is nice in the sense that it is actually a proper full fruit as the basis, so which I think is good. Now, would I be spending a lot of money buying acai berries or Manuka honey with it? I think the literature on that seems to be quite controversial in terms of whether they claim medicinal or dietary value. So it depends a lot on your beliefs and how much money you want to spend on these things. So I think we can grow pretty good honey here in the UK, and it would also enable us to pay a bit more attention to biodiversity maybe again. That's good, so we don't need necessarily New Zealanders to do this for us, I would say. And the thing with the acai berries is that there's a risk, and I think the quinoa story from Peru has shown that, all of a sudden there was a big quinoa health food market in the US, and it raised the prices for local quinoa in Peru to a level that people couldn't afford it anymore. So these feedback mechanisms are always a bit of a question mark with that. But please judge it.
I'm sorry, I just had a quick question. You said hunting the crayfish. How fast can it possibly go?
It's not that hard.
I think it's more like shooting a fish in a barrel kind of hunting, no?
Yeah, but the point is that everybody else is talking about farming and deliberate containment of the organisms, where here this is more about trying to clear up what's already out there.
Okay, interesting. Thank you very much. Next menu, our final menu. Please welcome Tom Webster. Tom is co-founder and CEO at GrowUp Urban Farms. GrowUp operate Unit 84, the UK's first commercial-scale aquaponic urban farm located in London. Welcome.
Thank you very much. So as we've already heard this evening, the food system we have today faces some quite large challenges, from the likes of climate change, resource constraints, and an ever-growing and increasingly urban population. In response to these challenges, I believe we're going to see some key trends emerging in the way we produce and consume food that I hope to showcase in my meal for the future today. I believe we're going to see more alternative sorts of proteins, like insects, but also increasingly high use of plant-based proteins for the human diet, and maybe even those grown or created in a lab. I think we're going to see a massive reduction in the amount of waste that we produce in the food chain, and we're also going to see more innovative uses of waste streams in a more circular economy approach to food production. I think we're also going to see an increasingly global diet where things that may seem exotic currently become the norm in the future, and nutrition, of course, is going to play a very important part of that. And also I have a slightly vested interest in the success of local farming and urban farming. And all of this, at the core of all of that, will be sustainability. Making sure that our food system can produce more with less resources, less environmental impact, and greater positive social impact. So to start with, I'd like to suggest an insect cake. Now this might not go down well with too many people, but I am no expert on insects myself. I do believe that we're going to see things like these cropping up in the diet, things that may seem quite alien now. And insects are quite widely eaten around the world. They're already available in the UK in the form of whole insects, insect meal, or I even had a chocolate bar the other day that was laced with insects. So it is happening. And these insects will be flavoured with some wonderful herbs grown in very sustainable urban farms that I will talk about in a second. So, on to the main course. I'd like to suggest that the meal to start with is served with a pint of locally brewed ale. Microbreweries are popping up all over the UK at the moment, and I think that it's a great trend, very good fun myself, and I'd like to see more great tasting beer produced by smaller artisan producers. The food itself will be a whole grilled tilapia with greens and grains. So that's essentially a fish with a side salad. For those of you who aren't familiar with tilapia, it's one of the most widely farmed fish in the world and eaten extensively throughout Asia, Africa and the Americas. Now the tilapia will be grown in a recirculating fish farm like the one on this slide. You see the series of blue tanks there in the middle. That's a picture from our farm in East London. The farm consists of a series of tanks which contain the fish, and then a set of filters which clean the water. And then the water passes from the tanks through the filters and then back into the fish tanks. When this is carried out correctly, this type of farming has some great opportunities. It allows us to maintain an extremely high water quality and very good fish husbandry standards, but also it ensures that nothing that happens on the farm can have any impact on the surrounding environment, or that anything happening on the surrounding environment can have any impact on the farm. Now, we've touched a bit on fish food today and animal feed, and I'll continue that theme. These fish will be fed on a combination of three things. Firstly, a byproduct of the beer production that's happening is spent grain, and that can be used as the main kind of bulk of the feed. And then secondly, more insects this time grown on food waste. They'll be used to make up the main source of protein. And then finally, as a source of the omega-3 that was touched on earlier on, we can use algae rich in omega-3 to enrich the omega-3 in the fish's diet and then make the fish itself rich in omega-3. Now, because this fish is fed on great quality feed in very good water quality with high standards of farming, the tilapia itself will taste great, it'll be really nutritious, as well as being extremely sustainable. And to top all of this off, by eating farmed fish rather than wild-caught fish, we're relieving a bit of stress off the natural ecosystem. And what's more, the waste water from this fish farm can be used in a hydroponic system to fertilise salads and herbs in a process that's known as aquaponics. So the picture here, to the left of my slide, is a picture from inside our farm in East London. It's exactly like the one I'm describing. We have a fish farm, we take the wastewater from the fish farm, we use that as a fertiliser for the plants. All these plants are grown under LEDs, specifically designed to give the right wavelength of light that the plant needs to grow. Whilst the nutrient-rich water from the fish farm provides a great source of nutrients for the plants. And instead of using pesticides, any pests that find their way into this controlled environment will be managed using natural predators in a process known as integrated pest management. Of course, our salads and fish will be super fresh because they'll be grown in urban farms, nice and close to the consumer. And the sum of all of this technology means you'll have a year-round production methodology that produces less carbon, uses less water than traditional forms of salad growing and protein production. And because they don't rely on the outside weather, they're a lot more resilient to the impacts of climate change. And what's more, by building farms like these in cities, predominantly in the industrial areas of cities, you present another great form of employment opportunity that is year-round, because we grow the same amount of salad in the summer as we do in the winter. So we offer all of our staff full-time contracts with all the perks of a full-time contract, like holiday, sick leave, and whatnot. And to go alongside this, we'll have some quinoa. The subject of quinoa, which is touched on quite nicely. Quinoa, the quinoa boom as a superfood created a bit of an issue where it was originally grown because it became unaffordable because of the export prices. So instead of importing this quinoa from halfway across the world, we'll be growing it here in the UK like it's already been done at the moment. And then finally, for dessert, let me just change the slide, there we go. A vegan chocolate brownie. Now, I myself am not a vegan, obviously I'm a fish farmer, but I do believe that we'll start to see more vegan style eating in our diet, because this vegan brownie will taste just as good as any other brownie you've ever had. It just won't contain any animal-based products. People are getting better at vegan cooking. You're seeing it a lot more. I had an incredible meal the other week, and I wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between that brownie and a regular brownie, which is what inspired this dish. So I think with people removing animal products where they can easily be replaced with plant-based ones, having less environmental impact, as part of their food. So thank you very much. That was my meal.
Come and join us at the table.
So I think compared to what we eat at present, this one is probably the most futuristic kind of approach. So there's a number of things that you would have to get used to, insects to start with. But I've eaten insects in various ways, either as such or in the form of an insect chocolate cookie. And yeah, it's like just anything else. So yeah, so nutritionally, I think what Thomas presented to you has quite a lot to offer. So you get the energy needed, you get protein from 2 different sources. You have some greens, I'll probably have a second helping of those. And yeah, probably add a bit of fruit. So I think zooming in on his main, though the beer and tilapia and greens and grains, in a more circular system, I think that's really the concept there. So we have a lot of things that cause us problem in the way we produce food. So things that are leaking out of the system, if you wish, whereas greenhouse gases, but also things that are leaching into the waterways. So what you're creating here is a closed, more or less closed system or circular system. So you should be able to get a very high, what we may call full chain efficiency of critical resources. So water, nutrients, light, things like that. So very good from that point of view. I do like the fact that you need to have a grain source, so which is probably better to grow in the field still, which actually would provide us in agriculture, even in this country, a new crop. We haven't got many new crops, but we do need better crop rotations. As an agronomist, I would say that would provide a bit more diversity again in the landscape. Good idea. So I think the big question is that acceptable for people? Is the cost of it affordable from an energy point of view also? And how much food could one produce in that way, compared to the huge amounts of food that we need on a global scale to feed 9 or 10 billion people. So I see it as a complementary approach, which has a lot of sort of local focus, and he's mentioned also the job creation, all types of things. So certainly something to explore further.
Good, thank you very much.
I'm the director of the National Research Network for Low Carbon Energy and the Environment, and effectively what we're looking over in the 5-year programme that Welsh Government, the Higher Education Funding Agency for Wales are funding, is the nexus between water, energy and the environment, land. But effectively, this whole discussion tonight has summed up what the whole of the network's about, I think. So ultimately, it's the sustainable food production from all of those resources. Water didn't really feature very much in tonight's discussion, but it's another one of those discussions where it's a huge important thing. So my first job is to thank the whole panel. So a big round of applause.